But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven.
This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. It's good to see you all, including new presence. It's such a delight to worship, not in isolated context, but together as a people of God, for sure. So growing up, I try hard to please my parents. Being a trophy child, I always felt like I had to live up to my parents' expectation at some level. I'm sure many of you can sympathize with that narrative. I had to do well in my studies, sports, and school in general. I think I had pretty good achievement in those areas, many areas, except in some that I failed. But if my parents had not gone through their pains and sufferings with my older brother first, I probably would have been imprisoned in their expectations for a long time. But after being drilled from that living lifestyle to living up to my parents' expectations, I learned a different way. To become a trophy child. This time is different though. If a formal way was about my parents achieving their own self-esteem and status at the expense of my well-being and autonomy, this time around my parents were respected and honored through me. I was much older, and still I'm older, and have a much freer will than my younger self to do so. Not because I have to. Whenever I live up to my parents' legacy of being diligent and honest, people around me see that. They see my parents through me, even though they have not met my parents. And the Bible urges us to remind ourselves once again that we cannot be Christians in a purely isolated. I'm skipping a sentence there. The Bible urges us to become sons and daughters of God who glorify our Father in heaven. Just like that. In the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5 to 7, it is about that kind of life, that styles of life. If last week's passage was implicit in the Beatitudes, today's passage becomes explicit. Our lives as witnesses of our Father in heaven. In this sense, we need to remind ourselves once again that we cannot be Christian in a purely isolated context. The blessed life we looked at in chapter 5, the poor in spirit, those who are mourn, meek, hunger and thirst for righteousness, merciful, pure in heart, a peacemaker, and being persecuted will get attention in some way. Even if that entails the form of opposition, we'll get attention from others and the world. That's where we ended last week. Rejoice and be glad. Even if you find oppositions or persecution on the way, because they are marked as a guarantee of our identity, our reward in heaven. If Jesus' word from last week spoke of one's conviction and status quo. Today, Jesus, with this salt and light passage, just wants us to consider its effect in the world. In other words, what happens when we live a blessed life. On that note, our passage today link to the previous passage. Let's read verses 10 and 12, 10 to 12. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Then 11. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. So they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus all of a sudden changed the audience from the third person to second. What you are experiencing as a Christian is a blessed life, and it has an effect on the world you are living. For this, Jesus gives two metaphors today to picture for us to live as witnesses, the way to glorify our Father in heaven. First metaphor is salt. In the ancient world, salt was used primarily as a preservative. Without freezers or refrigerating system, people used salt to preserve food. Incidentally, salt also adds the flavor to the food. When Jesus uses salt of the earth, you use a metaphor for Christians' life as a witness, and when he says, you are the salt of the earth, he's implying that your and my witnessing has the effect of preserving morals and delaying spiritual decaying of the world. But Jesus' metaphor for the witness, for our witness, has double entendre here. Not only does he challenges us to be preservatives of the world, but he also calls us not to lose our saltiness. On the one hand, this sounds somewhat ridiculous. Salt is salt. Salt is nothing but salt by its nature and cannot lose its saltiness. What it means is that you cannot avoid living as sons and daughters of God, no matter how hard you try to avoid it. You cannot escape a life of witness of God. Remember Jonah in the Old Testament? Even while he was running away from God's mission, a call to preach for Nineveh, people around him had expectations for him, of him. Why don't you call on your God and pray? No matter how our lives seem far away from being Christian, we cannot not be Christian. We are the salt of the earth, my friends. This is our identity. But salt, in some way, can lose its saltiness, not by losing its nature within, but by being adulterated and degraded. If salt is sufficiently adulterated by sand, for instance, then it can no longer be used as a preservative. It cannot function to preserve food. So by alluding to our mission as a salt on the earth, Jesus challenges us to resist our deterioration precisely because our mission is to fight the deterioration of the world. Does it make sense? John Stott, at age 89, shares his parting word with his readers in his last book, The Radical Disciple. We are actually doing book studies on it. the first thing he had to say to the Christians, to the next generation, us, was non-conformity. He points out the 4 different ideologies and the way of the world: pluralism, materialism, ethical relativism, and narcissism. How are we, my friends, resisting these surrounding cultures? How do you resist your deterioration? How do we as a church refuse the script to overcome our culture? Second, Jesus uses the image of light to explain our witness in the world as sons and daughters of God. We live in an industrial city, Boston, where the light is everywhere and already available at the flip of the switch and the click on the remote controller. However, we're not used to living in the dark nature of the ancient world, or somewhere in the wood, where all the lights go out after sunset, and it's so dark you can't even see 3 feet away from you. In that environment, light cannot be hidden. I have this night light at home. You plug it into one of the electrical outlet, and when it gets dark, the sensor activates dim light just enough to illuminate what's around it. So it's pretty dim light. You don't even see much of things. Unfortunately, my roommate has sensitive eyes, and this slight light coming from under his door will bother him to sleep, falling into sleep. During January, we had a radiant heater right in front of my room, and I sometimes walked into the heater when I walk up to leave the room before the sun rose. So just by the absence of the small night light, I stubbed my toe. In Jesus' day, light was not generated by electricity or the solar system of today's world, but its importance in society was as significant as today. Everyone would have chosen the burning wick over pitch darkness. The lamp, although small and insignificant, seemingly, was quite sufficient for everyone in the house, as Jesus mentions in this passage. Then Jesus' second imagery of the explicit witness of God's people was becoming light unto the world. Just as a lamp illuminated in the darkness in the past, and still now is with the night light, we're called to be that light. Especially in this context, being light and lightening the dark calls us not to personal confrontation nor spiritual pronouncement over others, but the light, at least in this context, in our passage this morning, means our good deeds. I'm not saying against, I'm not saying that we don't need to do street evangelism or go on mission trip to Nicaragua. There are noble things and they deserve high respect for their devotion. However, with or without these periodical activities, our lives need to be marked by good deeds. Such Christians at school show due diligence in their assignments and show honor and respect to their teachers and professors. Such Christians at work, as employees, refuse to rob their employers by being lazy on the job. Vice versa, as employers, they refuse to rob their employees by succumbing to greed and stinginess. Such Christians are first to help when their colleagues and friends are in need. and in difficulties especially. Such Christians at home love their folks. They respect one another. They are attentive to one another's longing and their hearts. Such Christians earnestly desire the achievement of others' interest and dislike vulgar humor, just as Paul said in Philippians. Such Christians strive for transparency in their honesty and genuineness in their concerns, rejecting the easy answer, falsely dichotomized or extremely polarized views. Such Christians are meek in their demeanor, yet bold in their pursuit of righteousness. We have come to an era where we lost this vision of witness. Along the way, we started to be just like people outside. We rejected this vision of witness, this Christian mission, what Jesus is talking about through the metaphor of being salt and the light. Just because the majority of the world is hiding under the basket, we're hiding our identity under basket too. At times like this, my friends, Jesus still calls us to be the light of the world and the city on the hill. Wherever you go and whatever you do, your identity needs to be explicit. In Jesus' day, the Israelites grabbed hold onto this identity as a judge of the world. But Jesus evoked their identity and mission from Isaiah 42 and 49, where Israel was called to be the light to the nation, for the nations. We must remember our mission is not be against the world, but for the world, just as Jesus was. My friends, how are we the salt of the earth, preserving the moral decay in our context? How are we, as a light of the world, illuminate the way to the Father for the people surrounding us? So, speaking of trophy child, redeemed trophy child, I noticed that I'm very similar to my earthly parents. I do things the way I was nurtured, but also because I have my parents' DNA. Whether I like it or not, I'm just like my parents in some way, and I act just like them. I speak like them. I notice some parts of me I cannot resist being my parents' son, and that's evident. People notice, especially when I am with my parents in the public square. But let me ask you, can people tell that you are sons and daughters of God in heaven when they see you? Let's pray. Can we all stand?